All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. So thank you everybody for joining our latest installment in our webinar series. Today we are going to be covering tips and tricks with SAP Business ByDesign. We're going to start off with a little introduction to our SAP Business ByDesign team here at Phoenix Business Consulting. I'm going to start with David Snyder, our practice director, 15 plus years executive leadership. I'm sure many of you here on the call know of David. We have Carol Casey, who is our finance lead for the ByDesign practice. We have Dan Lieberson, who is going to lead today's webinar session on tips and tricks in the ByDesign system, senior business consultant and has experience in multiple modules with SAP Business ByDesign. Myself, Sandeep Sidhu, manager of projects and accounts, 8+ years working in SAP consulting, and of course your contact for any escalations, questions, or concerns with your ByDesign system, with communications with our ByDesign team. I can be your go-to person for any of those communications. So feel free to reach out to me at any time for any questions and concerns. Now, who is Phoenix Business Consulting? For those of you that may not already work with us, we are a global practice with offices around the world, 250 plus employees with 4 main offices in 7 countries. We've been in business for over 25 years and are a all SAP company. We have consultants across the USA in all different time zones as well, with our headquarters in Sarasota, Florida. And we've routinely helped to develop SAP best practices. Full spectrum SAP partner. We work with the products listed here: S/4HANA, SuccessFactors, Analytics Cloud, Ariba, Concur, and of course, the system we're going to cover today, Business ByDesign. And again, we are all SAP. So we cover a full spectrum of the products listed here as part of our overall umbrella of services inside of Phoenix Business Consulting. Want to cover some webinar housekeeping items before we get started. You'll receive a link of today's presentation and a copy of the PowerPoint as well, so you won't need to take notes. Please put the questions you may have in the Q&A section of the webinar, and I'm going to keep track of those while Dan performs the walkthrough here. We'll try to get to those questions mostly at the end, so we're going to try to defer most of the questions to maybe the last 15, 20 minutes. However, if it is a question that pertains directly to the webinar and not your organization in particular, we can possibly interrupt the session, but you can raise your hand in that case for questions of that nature. But I will be keeping track of the Q&A section of the webinar as we go, and we'll try to keep the questions for the end. And of course, if we don't get to all the questions, we're happy to continue the discussion after the call. Again, you can contact me directly at any time after the webinar as well for any further questions, or if you want to book any kind of follow-up session with any of our consultants. You'll also receive a link to register for our future webinars. Again, so this is one of our installments for our overall series, and we're going to continue to perform these webinars year-round, and we'd like to cover a broad range of topic areas in the SAP Business ByDesign ecosystem. The agenda for today, we're going to go through some system customization. After that, we'll go through Launchpad customization. So working with the UI quite a bit there and some of the tips and tricks around the customization. Working with tables. As an example, the sales order table, that's going to be a major focus area today. Then customizing screens for business documents and some keyboard shortcuts. So a lot of tips and tricks that are going to pertain to and be useful for current users of the system, but also quite valuable for those of you that may be considering ByDesign as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Dan Lieberson to begin the session.
Thank you so much, Sandy. You can see my screen, correct?
Yep.
All right, great. It's great to see all you guys here. I see some familiar names, so I'm excited to start sharing with you guys. So I wanted to dive right in, talk about the Launchpad. So a lot of people, when they start by design, they think that the Launchpad is just for aesthetic reasons, and it actually can do a lot more than that. Usually, people start out with navigating to specific work centers and views by going into the specific work center, selecting a view, choosing a query, and it sometimes could be time consuming. Additionally, when it's time to select something else, let's say you want to go here, this tab replaces the previous tab, almost like in a browser where you go to a different URL. That can be frustrating sometimes because you want to have multiple tabs open at the same time so you can switch back and forth. So if you use the Launchpad, right, if you click sales orders here, you go back to Launchpad and now you click invoice requests, that will open up multiple tabs. So you do not have to worry about tabs replacing each other or constantly going and re-clicking things. And this ends up saving a lot of time in the future. So on the Launchpad here, I have set up tiles, which I will get into in a second, but I wanted to stick with that tabs that I was just talking about. If you have a workflow, let's say every single day you check sales quotes, sales orders, invoice requests, invoice documents. It in the past, you would have to go through every single one of these and perhaps click them. Also, there is a shortcuts option here that most of you are probably familiar with, but that is also time consuming as well as you have to click, go in there, and that still does not solve the issue of replacing tabs. So when you open up your screen, what you could do is click all the documents you need. This is a trick in reverse order. So let's say you wanted to have sales quotes here, then sales orders, invoice requests, invoice documents. If you click them in reverse order, you've now opened up your complete workflow and you don't have to worry about documents, rather views being replaced. So that's a really nice trick that I like. So if you would like to close any one of these tabs, you can click these three dots here and click the X next to them. This is very useful when you have business documents, and sometimes the name of the business document is cut off a little bit, so it's nice to see here. And if you want to close everything, you can click these double squares here. So now I would like to talk about tiles and how useful they are. So tiles are shortcuts directly to views. You see here for sales orders, example. Tiles are very flexible, and I often like to suggest to clients that have a similar workflow every day or multiple different workflows to create different rows of tiles for specific processes. So for example, I have a quote to cash process here. I have a procure to pay process here. I have master data. And this makes navigation really easy. So in order to add a tile or modify one, you click on your little icon here that has your initials. Go to start personalization mode. You notice that they're now X's and you can freely move these here. You can click this plus sign, which gives you the ability to add tiles. For example, I just added leads here. I'm going to get rid of it. Also, you can rename tiles regardless of how they're labeled in the system. So let's say I want to name accounts customers. That. Let's say I want to remind myself to do a specific order of things every day and check a specific order. I can rename this, for example, 1. right? If I wanted to check sales quotes, sales orders, invoice requests, and invoice documents, and I wanted to have new sales orders between them, but not necessarily, check that every day. So this gives a really nice ability to set steps for yourself, so you don't have to remember to do a lot of things. So that's the renaming and adding of them. So I'm going to press save. You press this little floppy disk here. You press OK. You're going to press your sign again on the top and stop personalization mode. And you're going to get used to the fact that it's very easy to go back and forth between personalization mode and a regular screen. You just simply do this, start personalization mode, do whatever you want, click save, this, and then back. And it will become muscle memory very quickly. And a lot of these configurations you'll only have to do once. So while it might seem on the call that some of these, take a bit of time, right, they'll only be happening once on your end. And modifications are very easy if you want to customize them further later on. So also on tiles, you can insert KPIs, which are one of my favorite things in ByDesign. They're incredibly useful for tracking important data points and clicking into reports incredibly quickly. So in the past, let's say you wanted to navigate to a sales order report. You have a few ways of doing that. The longest way is to click sales orders, go to reports. You have your query. Maybe you forgot to make favorites here, which is through the priority, which most of you probably already know. You would scroll down to the report you wanted. You would click, it wouldn't be the view that you wanted. You would scroll to a different selection, a different view. So it's a little bit time consuming. That was just 10 clicks. However, on the Launchpad, you can create KPIs that with one click open up a report. And it opens a report with a specific view and a specific selection. So despite an administrator saying that it's going to limit you to a specific view, a default view and selection, you can customize a KPI so that it's just for you for a personalized selection and view. In order to get to the full report, you just press Analyze Data, and you're right there with that selection and view. So that was 2 clicks to get here and 1 click to see the actual report. Something that I also love about KPIs is you can set targets for yourself and see a visualization of it. So for example, I've set a monthly sales goal of $100,000 and we're currently at 156. So we are in the green. If we were below that, we would be in this warning area, which we've set up. We can see a deviation saying that we're 56% over our target, which is lovely, or a number. You could put balance sheet items on here as well and set targets for those as well. You can even put your entire balance sheet here if you'd like to see it. So for here, I just filtered for cash on hand. I'd like to have at least 80,000 at any given point. So if we dip below 80,000, it's going to turn orange or red, depending on our needs. So that's the Launchpad. Going above here, I wanted to quickly go through some icons that you might not be familiar with. This icon here is Touch View, which is very useful if you're working on an iPad, other tablets. So that expands different screens. So it makes the lines much bigger and easier to touch. Zooming in, whether you're on a desktop or a keyboard with a tablet, is Control+. So that zooms in. And this is very useful for warehouse tasks. For instance, these buttons can become as big as you'd like and simply say confirm right here. So I'm going to go back to 100%. Go back to touch view. I'd like to talk about my settings here. A lot of you probably already know about this, but I'd like to go through it anyway. For those who might not be as familiar, you can set your own date format here, which is independent rather, of what your administrator sets. You can set a decimal notation. You can set your own time zone, a time format, and language. On-screen help. So if you notice that you go to sales orders, you're going to see there's these little question marks which give explanations of what things are. These are incredibly useful when you're starting out in the system, and even when you're, a few years in the system if you want to remember things. However, for aesthetic reasons, you can turn them off if you'd like, and just by unclicking this, pressing save. I'm going to close. Use my trick here. Now if I go back, okay, pretty interesting. Now you can see when I reloaded the page, those question marks went away. And so it's an aesthetic choice. I'm going to turn them back on for myself. Appearance. You can change the appearance of your screen. There are different options here. For example, we're going to go to evening, which is a dark mode. And I'm going to change it back to the one I like, which is morning horizon. So next, I'd like to talk about tables and queries. So many of you know about the query function on top here using this little funnel. Using the funnel, you can create queries that filter specific criteria of the table values here. So for example, I created one called March 2025 orders. In order to do this, I made a selection here that said it was changed between these two values. You can go to town on customizations here in terms of queries. So let's say, for instance, I'm only interested in descriptions that include the word cooling. I can go to the description category, add plus, and say contains pattern, cooling. Press OK, and press go. And now we'll filter just by the description cooling. In order to save this query, I'd press save query. I'd give it a name. And I can either execute the query on selection or use it as a default query. So execute query on the selection means that if you open up the tab immediately, it will load all the line items for you. If you do not have that selected, so I'm gonna show you what that does. You're gonna have to click here to execute the query. This is actually, you might say, why would I ever use that? Why would I always want it to be automatic? The answer is if you have hundreds of thousands of sales orders, right, through this filter, and every single time you want to come here, you want to add different criteria, it might be useful to not have the table load up first, add additional criteria, and then press go. So I'm going to go back to organize queries. So you can see here, once you've created something, you can say that you either want to execute on selection, you can remove it, and you can set it as your default. So next I want to talk about customizing tables. So in order to customize a table, go back to personalization mode. You hover over the table and you're going to see it's highlighted in this blue line. You right click and you have some options here. Let me zoom out a little bit. The one is display settings. Display settings gives you options of the aesthetic options of this screen that will allow you to see things clearer and a little bit more efficiently. And it might seem like a small thing, but over time, it could really help your eyes. So for example, let's say I'm really only interested in the top 4 sales orders of my query. I can reduce the visible rows to 4. I can press apply. And what that does is every time I open this screen, I will only see the first 4 rows. What that does is it allows me to also see more of this bottom section here, and that can be very useful. I go back here, go to table display settings. Conversely, I can expand it a lot if I don't feel like scrolling, right? I can say I want to see 20 at once, right? Because sometimes you scroll. In this case, we've seen the whole table because there's only 20 March 2025 orders. So you can go to town customizing that. Go back. I'm going to put it back at 10. Grid lines. You can show just horizontal grid lines. So without the lines here horizontally, or vertically rather. You can show just vertical. And you can show none as well. So both is the default, right? Export columns. So when you press this export button here, export columns means that if it's selected as visible, it will only export the columns that you see on the table. If you select all, every possible data point that there is, which I'll show you in 1 second, will be exported. So first of all, I'm going to press apply. So if you see here, even if it's not selected, all of this data is going to be exported as well. So that allows you to customize this export button here. So I'm going to go back to table display settings. Language, if you have more than one language in your system, you can show that as well. In this case, the system only has English. If we go back here, there is now sorting and grouping. This is also incredibly useful, and I teach it to my clients all the time as one of the first things. So I'm going to start from a blank canvas here. So in order to start from a blank canvas, you press this arrow here, which removes from the used column sorting to the unused. This means you add all, and this means you remove all. So let's say I'm interested in always seeing my sales orders from the latest created sales order to the oldest. What I like to do is take sales order ID, bring that here, and say I want to sort descending. So I press OK. I'm going to save. And I'm going to stop personalization mode. So now, every single time you open the screen, and you can see there's this little down arrow here, down arrow signifying it's descending. All your sales orders will be descending. This is wonderful. I like this the most. This is the equivalent of a email inbox where you have the most recent above. So another thing that's great about sales order descending is even if you've created something on the same day, the higher the sales order number, the later on in the day it was created. So every time you open this, you will get this query. Go back to personalization mode, and I'm going to go back to sorting. So let's say I'm interested in the requested date, and I want that descending. But I also want to add another layer. So in addition to it saying the most recent to the oldest, I also want to sort by description next. So what this is going to do is if I say I wanted then to sort by description ascending, it will give me in date order, but within those dates, it will give me the description from an alphabetical order from A to Z, not Z to A. Z to A would be descending. And this is the equivalent if you've used Excel with multiple levels, hierarchical filters. Press OK. Let me save. Yeah. So now we see we have the requested dates here, and within the requested dates, things are alphabetical. Something that I used in a previous job was this total filter, rather column name, not filter. So if I press descending here and I press save, it will always show me the highest value sales order on top. And this is very useful if you want to see, okay, who's our biggest sale right now? Who's our biggest client that has a open order? It's really useful. So if I reload the screen, it will always, the values will always be on top here. This is really nice. Go back to personalization mode. Additionally, when you're in personalization mode, you can drag columns. You can rename columns. So let's say I want to call account customer. Call customer. By the way, side note about customer and account. A lot of you might be wondering, if you're new to the system, why suppliers are called suppliers and accounts are called accounts when most of the time it's simply customers. The answer for that is in the marketing to cash workflow, which is signified by this blue here. In marketing, there are competitors that you can track. Competitors are not customers, so they're technically accounts, and that provides an umbrella term for everything. Similarly, in new business, you can have prospective accounts that are not customers yet. So accounts is an umbrella term for all of these. However, if you do not use competitor tracking or potential customers and you start with sales orders, maybe you'd like to change it to customer. That's fine. Also on reports, you can change column names to anything you want. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind. It's important, though, that you always write down and keep track of the SAP lingo and the lingo that you've changed it to if you are going to make these changes. Because in some business configuration elements, you won't be able, through personalization mode or adaptation mode, be able to change them. So you just need to know, okay, I've changed it to customer, but in some other places in the system, it will be referred to as an account. You can add columns here. So let's say I want to see contact. I have the contact here. Stop personalization mode. Next, I'm going to go into a sales order and talk to you about personalization mode within a sales order. And zoom out a little bit. So within a sales order, you can drag fields. You can remove fields. So let's say I'm not interested in seeing the country. If all my clients are in the United States, for example, and I don't want to crowd the screen a little bit less, create free space, I can hide them like that. If you right-click on a field, you could also similarly change the names here. So for example, I might want to similarly say customer. Stop personalization mode, and I'm not going to save. So now I'd like to go to adaptation mode so I can show you a few more features. The difference between personalization mode and adaptation mode is all users have the ability to personalize their screens, right? By design, it's called by design for a reason. You can go to town with the design. Adaptation mode is only available to generally super users or high-level admin, and they're able to configure screens that will be able to override individual personalizations or add extension fields, make fields mandatory. So in order to go to adaptation mode, you select key user settings and start adaptation mode. Once you're here, there are going to be more features that are clickable. If you right-click a field, you'll now see that you can set it as mandatory or read-only. So if you set this as mandatory, a little red star is going to be here. And if a user attempts to save this document without a description, they're going to get an error warning. I'm going to unselect it. If you notice, you can similarly drag and drop to change the order of things. And if you press save, now there's this publish button that's going to happen. When you press this, you're going to get this option, overwrite individual personalization changes to this screen. Now, this should be in red text because this is important. If you select this, everyone's personalizations in your company will be overridden to whatever you've just done. If not, and you don't select this, you can publish. So if you've made a field mandatory, that will be there, but the order of things will remain the same. Next, I want to talk about extension fields. So extension fields, some of you that are newer to the system might not know about them. They are user-defined fields. So you can create drop-downs, checkboxes, date fields that are specific to your company. I created one called follow-up status, in this case for the sales orders. And it has the options of email needed, phone call and email needed, or no follow-up needed. So a lot of you on the system that are familiar with the system might already use extension fields, but something you may not know is that you can push these to the sales orders table itself here. And the way to do that is to go to adaptation mode when you're on the sales table screen. You right-click, there's extension fields. And now you see your extension fields. And I have my follow-up status, and I pressed is already added, which adds it to the screen. So with that, you can then customize it even further with a query that you can say, for example, I would like the follow-up status to only be phone call needed. I'm going to press go. So now, what that does, if I drag this here, is I can create a query for myself, right? If I save this query as phone call needed, I can even set that as my default query. I can see all of the sales orders that just need a phone call needed. So it could be customized anything to your specific company that way. Furthermore, we were talking about KPIs earlier. You can push those extension fields to certain KPIs. So I'm going to go start personalization mode. And I've created a KPI called phone calls to make today. So if I click here, I've created a report with a specific review, view and selection that has just that filter we were talking about with phone calls needed, and a view that has emails and phone numbers. So I've taken that filter from that table and created this. So every day, this number is going to change. So all I would have to do is click here. And now I have access to simply send an email or have their phone number ready to, on hand. I can see the values of those sales orders, and I can navigate directly to the sales order. So that saves so much time, because in the past, what you would have to do is go to sales orders, click sales orders. Perhaps we were in all orders before. Wait for it to load. You can see how it's significantly slower than using our queries. Okay, then we open a sales order. I'm gonna go back here. You edit the sales order. Maybe look at the items, check the available to promise status, see if the follow-up status is phone call needed. And we'd have to make all those clicks and then do our follow-up, if we needed to do a follow-up email, follow-up call. One last thing about the sales order table is every query, I'm gonna go back here, start personalization mode. Okay. You can add a table calculation. So you can do sum, averages, maximum and minimum. I do sum, and I like to put them on the top of the table. And this requires you to reload the page. So now you're going to see totals here. And these totals, again, change with the query, right? They change with whatever you're querying. So I see we have about 20 minutes left. So I want to show one more thing on the screens itself. It's keyboard shortcuts. And I do want to save time for questions. So if you guys have follow-up questions about anything we've already discussed, please feel free to email me and I can go into detail there. So technically, you can use ByDesign without a mouse. So you can use just keyboard shortcuts. So tab, if you press tab, it goes to the next field. So I'm going to do that again. Press tab, it went from this field to this field. Now, if I press spacebar, it will open a drop-down menu. And if I press spacebar again, it will go into that specific document or field. I'm going to close it again. Similarly, if you press spacebar on a query, spacebar again, it will allow you to navigate this way. When you're here, you can press tab, spacebar again, it will open edit. If you press shift tab, it will go the reverse direction. So shift tab, enter. So I just went view all. So I'll do that again because it's a little fast. Shift tab, and now you can see view all is activated, and you press spacebar. A lot of people wish there was the ability to go to view all immediately, which in some screens you can. But if you get used to this shortcut, it will be done in less than 1 second, where you simply press edit and shift tab enter. And that took less than 1 second. So you'll get used to it if you decide to use that shortcut. So I want to show one last thing that's pretty cool. Close this. You can, in any field that has a date, write the word today and it changes to today. I just think this is a fun trick that not that many people know of. You can do yesterday and you can do tomorrow. So that's a very fun trick. Sometimes if you forget what date you're on and you're on a screen with a field, you could just write today and know what the date is. So I wanted to end on that fun note. So those are some tips and shortcuts that I wanted to share with you guys. And thank you so much, Sandeep, for hosting. And maybe we go on to questions next.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. So I'm going to pass it off to our attendees. If anybody has any questions before we wrap up, we do have some extra time here. If anybody has any questions, we'd love for you to share them in the Q&A section now, and we'd love to answer those. And of course, if any questions come up after this session wraps up, you can always email myself or Dan for answers to those questions as well. But we do have a few minutes, so if anybody wants to share, Dan and I are going to stay on for a few minutes extra here. But if you don't have any questions, then feel free to drop off, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar session. Look out for a link in your email inboxes, and we'll see you then. So we have one question, Dan, from an anonymous attendee. Are there any quick reporting tips and tricks in the system that you may have? And I know you can probably go on for hours about
I
reporting.
could go on for hours. Is there maybe yeah, I could go on for hours. I love reporting so much. Quick tips and tricks with reporting. There are so many things to share. Maybe you could be a little bit more specific about something you'd like to see. And if not, I can think for a little bit of, something cool.
So to our attendee with that question, was it more of a general question, or do you have specifics you'd like to break it into?
Or do you just want to see something cool? If you don't, if I can show something cool if there's no
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that, Dan.
okay. So by the way, did you just see that when I clicked here, it replaced that? I don't want to do that. I want to use my shortcut. See the sales orders here. And let's say I want to go to reports. Thinking of a good selection, guys. Give me a second. So something that you could do is you can drag row fields to column fields. So you can drag this follow-up status down to here. And what this does is it creates columns here, like a pivot table in Excel, let's say for a luxury heating and cooling company, this is the value of the phone calls needed. Maybe I would prefer to go back to the counter instead, might be a little bit more useful. So if I drag this down here, I now see I need to make one phone call with this sales order, one phone call with this sales order. So if I maybe remove the sales order column, you now need to see that for counts, I need to make these. So you can drag anything down here. So this is really cool. If I were to add description or maybe product. So now I see here, you can add product here in these columns, like so. So those are a few quick cool things. Any other questions? Oh, we have 5 here. Okay. Um, for example, customer aging customizations. Customer aging. So what type of can you so for customer aging customizations, are you looking for a KPI in your dashboard? What do you mean by because that's a very broad topic for aging customizations. It's a good subject, but maybe you can be a little more specific.
You want to start by pulling up an aging report for customers, Dan?
Sure.
And I know there's quite a few topics here. Maybe we can go through. I mean, we could talk about the add-in and how many, obviously, customizations can.
It sounds like we should do a reporting seminar.
I know, no, which will happen eventually
Yeah.
for the attendees that are still with us here. We
So are we
will
talking
do
about
a
aging
reporting
for
session.
payables or receivables, did he say in the chat? Or was it not specified?
So region-wise analysis for outstanding day brackets.
Let me see what he's. And stop sharing to see the specific question again. Region-wise analysis for outstanding day brackets. Okay. I think I understand what you're saying. So this is a demo system, by the way. I don't know how thorough the data is going to be for your specific example, but sorry, I want to go to aging rather. Region. So if they have region here. So by the way, when you're adding fields here, it will house this under. If you want to add it as a separate field that is not housed under, we go here.
Dan, you got to share.
Oh, I'm not sharing. Sorry. Thank you, Sandy. Sorry, guys. Thought I was sharing. So I'm in aging list for receivables now. I've added this country region here. And maybe I'll drag that up there. If I'm not interested in the customer, but just the region up here. And then I have those day brackets like you were talking about. So that's a way to break down country receivables by day brackets. See, there's maybe more questions. It's all good. Business One is a great place to start if you're learning by design. You can reach out with me with questions.
But of course, to add to what we just went through, of course, we are going to go through reporting in much more detail. It is one of the webinars we are considering, and likely Dan will lead or one of our many consultants here on the North American side. So look out for more webinar topics, and we really appreciate that feedback as well. If reporting questions are something for us to cover, we'd love to do a session on that. And there's so much extensibility with reports and by design, and so we definitely want a dedicated session for that. As possibly a webinar in the future. So we're gonna take that into account for future webinar sessions. So appreciate the questions. Are there any other further questions before we wrap up? Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Again, look out for a link for the next webinar, and we're excited to see you join on the next one. Take care, everybody.